So good
Yeah.
afternoon from Nigeria. It's 15 minutes past 2 here. And the title of my presentation is Epistemology and Algo-reliabilism, a pathway to sound ethical artificial intelligence. Just as I've been introduced, Titilola Olojede of the Department of Philosophy, National Open University of Nigeria. So my first slide gives us an overview of artificial intelligence, which I think this audience is already familiar with. So I'm just going to go on to the next. Some of the ethical challenges are wide-ranging. They cut across various fields: education, security, healthcare, and I have a list of them on the screen. Then to address some of these challenges, there are various ethical principles already proposed. I have a list of them on the screen. They are quite numerous. Okay, so but from the previous slides, there are commonalities among the principles that have been proposed. So from the previous slides, the recurring ones are transparency, inclusion, responsibility, impartiality, reliability, security, and the likes. Then in the recent, I think precisely last week, US Congress interaction with the CEO of the OpenAI, I think Mr. Blumenthal talked about transparency, accountability, and limits of use. And at that forum, it seems it was unanimously agreed to as these principles being important in the regulation of AI. Then also in the literature, we have certain principles also being put forward as very important to the regulation of artificial intelligence. And so among these three, set of principles, commonalities, we can see from the screen that transparency is very important, followed by responsibility. Then we have the 4 traditional ethical principles highlighted: justice, non-maleficence, beneficence, and autonomy. Then of course we have trust. Less common, we have accountability, dignity, and solidarity. So beyond the principles, there are critical questions that I think it's usually glossed over in the discourse of ethical principles to be applied to the issue of AI. And the questions border on to whom or to what does ethics apply, and is it applicable to the originators of AI, or for AI itself, or for the users? So I try to profess some answers to that, and I think that basically ethics ought to be part and parcel of the design from the scratch, the development, and the entire life cycle of AI. So in other words, we ought not to have built the system and begin to try to play some catch up or do some damage control by trying to infuse it with ethics, but rather it should be from the scratch. And so to that, there is an ethical industry standards that should be put in place. Also to the question, to what or to whom? Of course, when we talk about robots, humanoid robots, there are various discussions going on whether ethics should be applicable to robots, to what their personality is and the agency of it. Lots of discussions. We also know that there are some robots that have gotten legal legal status in some countries and the like, but it still springs up the question, can we hold them morally responsible for what they've done, or can we not? To this, I think that we could have an expanded notion of humanity, such that we can extend humanity to robots, but not in the way we apply humanity to humans, But in drawing on the idea of animism, we could, to some extent, treat maybe AI systems or robots nicely or kindly and the like. So there's also a sense in which AI apply to you. I mean, the ethics of AI applies to users themselves, especially how we treat them. So in this sense, ethics of AI can apply to users of AI as well. There are instances of robots being treated very, very badly, being beaten, being hurt, and people around show empathy to them. So based on that, I would think that beyond the debates going on the agency, on the personality, there is a sense in which we could have an expanded discussion of what humanity entails. Now, beyond that, talking about epistemology of algorithm, which is actually the crux of my discussion, on the screen, when we talk about algorithm, we have logic. I mean, it springs up the idea of logic and probability, which are branches of philosophy. I mean, logic being an arm of philosophy, and mathematics, branches of mathematics and aspects that they underlie. I mean, logic and probability, they are at the base of AI systems, the building of it, and they play significant roles in the development of AI. So also algorithm, it relies on and it makes use of some inputs, and with the help of mathematics and logic, it brings about an output. So when we're talking about AI algorithm, what we do is we make use of both the inputs and outputs concurrently for it to learn the data and generate output. So, but more importantly, the idea I'm putting forward in this paper is that based on the importance algorithms play in the life of AI systems, there's a need for an ethical AI. I mean, ethical AI cannot be devoid of a consideration of the algorithm employed. And this leads to the idea of algorithmic reliabilism, and in the sense that we need to have this in the development of AI itself. Now, before I go into algorithmic reliabilism, an example of it can be seen in certain principles that have been proposed: transparency, explainability. These two, they necessitate the need for a fusion of epistemology, because it's not when an AI system has been deployed, has been launched, that we begin to talk about the transparency. Transparency is a process that underlies, that is at the foundation of the beginning, I mean, the building of AI itself. So beyond these two, some of the other principles like trust, inclusion, reliability, they would fare better if we put in some due diligence. I mean, if due diligence is done to make the process itself trustworthy and not merely the output. So there is a need to do that. So when I talk about algorithmic reliabilism, first, reliabilism. Reliabilism is an offshoot of the traditional reliabilist epistemologies, which says, I mean, it basically emphasizes process, that one knows a particular proposition if the proposition is true. However, the idea of reliabilism being referred to more importantly here is the much more recent process reliabilism of Goldman, which stresses the importance of carrying out a set of actions in order to arrive at an intended or desired outcome. So in this context, algorithm reliabilism, I conceive it as a set of normative accountability mechanisms. And these mechanisms are one that incorporates certain goals for us to make AI safer and more just, while becoming more efficient for persons and for groups. So when we talk about good, we're talking about it as an apparatus or equipment if it serves us in the aim for which we had wanted it to serve, or the aim in which we had envisioned. So it means that something is good as a result of its efficiency in achieving a desired outcome. The outcome may either be desire for itself, or it could be that we seek it as a means to an underlying end, some kind of utilitarian benefit. So if we seek it for itself, we tend to think of it as good, and so we desire it, and it's an offshoot and in and of itself. Okay, so I'll just move on. So good in the context of AI ethics is conceived as an output of an algorithm that is reliable. Okay, algorithmic reliability. So with these goods, how do I conceive these goods? In the sense of solidarity, subsidiarity, human dignity, natural law, interpretive finance, and even coherence. So when we talk about good, it's an offshoot. It is conceived as a social justice. I mean, as a principle of social justice, an offshoot of the idea of common good, precisely the Aristotelian themistic common good, where good denotes all-inclusive, that every individual, irrespective of status, we must all work together and promote the good of one another. So when we looking at each of the goods, when we talk about subsidiarity, like for example, the previous in the slides I had shown on the various ethical principles that have been proposed to regulate AI. All of those principles emanate from the global south. So, however, a sound ethical principle ought to be an eclectic, a mixture, complex mix of ideas, interests, and values from diverse stakeholders. So, relying on this principle, I mean, the principle of subsidiarity, it's a principle of devolution, of allocation of competencies among institutions, among groups, among peoples. And so in the AI context, it will not be too nice for the discussion to continue not be inclusive enough of other voices in the populace. So subsidiarity is one of inclusion, which is not just political divisions of the word, but subsidiarity also behoves us to recognize persons that ordinarily their voices are not heard, especially when we talk about feminist AI and the likes. So we'll talk about human dignity. What I mean by this in the context of AI ethics is that systems should be such that AI systems should be such that they do not ride roughshod on humans. And what do I mean by this? The idea of privacy is very big on how, constant surveillance, the idea of not exacerbating worsening existing inequalities. So it's important for us to recognize that. And so the deployment of AI systems should be that ethics ought to take cognizance of the dignity of humans. I also know that there are discussions around AI, maybe they are just slippery slopes arguments wanting to take over the world in which humans are not able to live, in which they might just revolt at some point. But the development of AI pertaining to human dignity ought to be that to respect the dignity of humans. When we talk about solidarity in this context, we mean that we should look out for one another, both as individuals and as groups in terms of inclusion. And so no one is left behind, so to speak. Talking about interpretive finance in this instance, I mean by that there should be a complex mix of a number of ideas, such as being simplicity of the algorithm, its use, and how easily explainable it is, how understandable, yes, deployable, ethically viable it is. Then we're talking about coherence. Coherence ordinarily means congruent, internal consistency or cohesion existing between AI systems and the intended audience. So coherence in this context has to do with how well human and AI and human, they fit well with each other, how they interact seamlessly, especially in an ethical manner. In a nutshell, like a smooth techno-human relation with limited or mitigated consent. Okay. So conclusion, what I've just been trying to put forward in the last 15 minutes is that first, there is a need to sit back and tease out certain important questions regarding AI and ethics so that we could have a very robust, detailed, and if you like, all-encompassing discussion about the kind of ethical issue we should be looking at. Ethical principle we should be putting forward. Two, in the discourse of ethical AI, we can't leave behind the process or the epistemology of it. So the process is as important as the output of it. Then regarding the epistemology, this paper makes a case for algo-reliabilism. It's also an emphasis on the process that develops AI. And the algo-reliabilism is broken down into it being constituents of goods that we could hold the system accountable to from the scratch, not after it has been deployed. Such goods discuss subsidiarity principles of subsidiarity, solidarity, human dignity, interpretive finance, and coherence. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're muted, Jason.
Thank you for noticing that. Thank you very much for your talk again, Helen. That was very, very interesting. And I will open up the floor now to some questions.
No, I just had a quick question about this debate between reliability and trustworthiness in the way you evaluate artificial intelligence. That there's some people who advocate for this idea of trustworthiness, and you're on the reliability side. How do you define what reliability is as opposed to the idea of trustworthiness in the area of AI ethics?
Oh, thank you. Trustworthiness and being reliable, what the difference is. I think if at all there is a difference, it's quite thin. When something is reliable, it's dependable, and we can say it's trustworthy. So I would think, I stand to be corrected, that it depends on the context. We can't have something an AI system that is trustworthy without having taken cognizance of, trustworthiness can't be devoid of being reliable. It's impossible to say this AI system is trustworthy. It will be antithetical. It's trustworthy and yet say it is not reliable. Okay, so I think they go hand in hand, and there could be some difference between them, but I think it's quite slight. And
And I also have a question. I'll start myself in there. So I'm quite interested in maybe getting you to elaborate more on this reliabilist epistemology. So I'm trying to work out. So of course, the idea that you're putting forward here is that the goods of AI they result from a certain process, and I'm wondering whether this reliabilist perspective is, I don't know, somehow able to be context neutral or maybe trying to be context sensitive, because how else would it be able to, be claimed to be inclusive and be able to avoid kind of epistemic injustice or epistemic exclusionary practices? Because it seems to me that the processes themselves can be exclusionary in this way. So I'm trying to work out the relationship here. Does that make sense?
That the process can be what?
The process of an algorithm itself might be something that is exclusionary, or might, propagate a dominant perspective, or not enable a marginalized perspective, or not, permit a certain context to reach the same conclusions about reliabilism or trustworthiness of an AI. My thought here is, we might look at something like what was employed with COVID, these kind of COVID tracking apps, and we could look at how these work and how they were trying to, make them transparent and be employed by different governments. but that there might be just different reasoning involved in whether you should use this or not. So in the context of Australia, which is the context that I know best, I would say there are very good historical and cultural reasons for the Aboriginal community to reject this kind of technology, regardless of how reliable, transparent, open the technology is. There's just some type of, they have a different epistemic experience of the government in this way that seems to be worth bringing into the equation.
Okay, thank you. In the context of AI systems, those goods highlighted are such that, like if I take subsidiarity, for example, principle of inclusion, of devolution, not to take what maybe a smaller community could do by their own strength, and not to have a higher authority take it from them, so to speak. I think that in itself for an algorithmic reliabilism that has subsidiarity in the context of AI as one of the goods, I think it's kind of help us to address the issue of context and the issue of exclusion. Then also solidarity. Basically, the point I'm making is that the goods are such that they try to address some of the concerns of diversity, concerns of inclusion, concerns of transparency that are usually put forward when the issue of ethics of AI is concerned. I'm not saying that these are goods or principles, in the context of principles of solidarity and subsidiarity that are foolproof. There are some persons who would disagree, who would actually think that the whole idea of common good, out of which this idea of good comes from, it's not suited for a pluralistic society. But the idea of good and putting forward is not the liberal, is not the conservative kind of, but one that has those goods that, as much as to some extent, help us to address some of the concerns of reliability that you put forward, you asked about.
Great, thank you. That was much clearer now. I saw Katja started to speak before. Do you have a question, Katja?
Well, hello, Helen. I have a question in regards to robotics, because you mentioned robotics, and I find your presentation very important when we have real anthropomorphized human-machine interaction. And you were talking about human rights. So my question, I think it's a simple one, but I don't have the answer. Within robotics, anthropomorphized robotics, not Roomba running around, like Sophia, let's talk Sophia, are the concepts of dignity one-sided or two-sided in order to be reliable? Should we expect also to be, to apply, you said we cannot call it human dignity, but some kind of robotic dignity coming from our side? Or can we just expect the robots, the machine to be apply human rights to us? Is it two-sided or just one side?
I think, thank you very much. And I'll just take a quick time to appreciate your presentations, and hopefully if I have your email address, I will email you my questions. I'm just taking some time. Okay, so I think it goes both ways. We can treat them nicely, kindly, and drawing on the idea of human dignity as one of the goods of algorithmic reliability, that it should be that AI systems, well, humanoids, anthropomorphized robots too, ought to be that they don't get to ride roughshod on our dignity as humans as well. So when we have the expanded discussion of what humanity is, it incorporates them, and of course it's symbiotic. I hope that's clear.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question that builds exactly on this, which I find quite interesting. So, what do you think of this idea? So, that's floating around at the moment, that treating robots, kindly, with respect, treating them as humans, is really like vital for us to kind of maintain those elements of our social norms. So we can imagine how, let's see, a mass proliferation of robots into our homes and a normalization of treating them like objects might, in the back door, normalize certain types of behavior that we maybe have already, as a society, rejected, such as the relationship between master and slave. And so it might come up again through a normalization of this kind of attitude, this behavior, this seeing it as okay to treat robots in this way. It might bleed over into the way we think about people who might be doing the same kinds of tasks that these robots might be able to do. So if they are in a care facility, then where they aren't robots, but rather actual people, we might have some kind of bleed over. What would you make of that kind of idea?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, but I don't see, well, I don't quite see how it shifts the goalpost to the way the tasks that robots perform, that humans perform, that we might begin to see humans like less of a human, like servants, so to speak. No, because I think I don't think how it extends to that, because I once saw a video where robots were being treated very badly, being beaten, being dragged, this violent treatment. I felt a lot of empathy, And so if I'm to use that perspective, I would think that if persons begin to regard humans as less of human, because those humans, they perform the function that robots actually do, I would think that there must be some problem with that human, because this is fellow human. It shouldn't be that because like dogs guard our homes, right? They can alert us of intruders or intrusion into our facility. We also have security men doing that. That has not necessarily made maybe half of the populace to see security men or security guards, as less of a human. Well, of course, we have few persons who, because of maybe status oriented or power oriented, will think people doing menial jobs, at least they consider that they shouldn't be treated so well. But that's the exemption to the rule, not the norm. So in this context, I would think the problem will be with a human thinking less of a fellow human, because that human performs the tasks that robots can also perform.
Okay, thank you so much.